Hi, and welcome to the second Capital concert of the current season with the South Carolina Philharmonic called Tchakovsky and Tangos. And so glad that many of you are joining us for the live stream of this event. And I'm here to share with you a little bit about the pieces you're going to be hearing this evening. Tchaikovsky, part of the title comes from the second half of the program, which will feature his final piece and final symphony, the Sixth Symphony by Tchaikovsky, subtitled Pathétique. And that was, as I mentioned, his final work. Um, Tchaikovsky conducted the premiere, the first performance of this symphony, and actually 9 days later he passed away due to illness, complication from cholera that had gotten to his kidney, and that sort of started a lot of speculation and so on. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. In the first half of the program, we opened with a second movement of a symphony, the only symphony the American composer Amy Beach wrote in 1896 called Gaelic Symphony. And we're going to be opening the concert with the lovely second movement of this symphony, which starts out slow but has a very exciting reel section, sort of all very, of course, Irish influenced in this symphony. And then we go to the tangos portion of the concert right before the intermission, featuring our concertmaster, Marilee Taylor-Kinosian. She's going to be performing the solo part in the Four Seasons of Buenos Aires, a piece written by the tango master Astor Piazzolla, that's been arranged for solo violin and string orchestra, much very sort of homage to of course, when we think of the Four Seasons, a lot of you probably think of the Four Seasons by Vivaldi that was written in 1725. Of course, that's one of the most popular pieces of classical music. And so the Piazzolla, this particular version of Piazzolla is sort of fashioned in a similar way to the Vivaldi. So it features a violin soloist and then with a string orchestra backing Marilee up. So it's a fun concert. There'll be some tango dancers in the lobby, I believe, before the concert as well. So let's get started with the first piece on the program. And that, as I mentioned, it's the second movement, Alla Siciliana movement of the Gaelic Symphony by Amy Beach. She wrote this, as I mentioned, in 1896, sort of almost basically as a response, if you would, to the famous New World Symphony by Antonin Dvorak that was premiered a couple years prior to this, or more officially, Dvorak Symphony Number 9 with the subtitle From the New World. Of course, Dvorak spent a couple of years teaching, traveling in the United States. He was teaching in New York City, but then he got homesick, and he heard that there's a large group of Czech immigrants. There's a Czech migrant community in Spillville, Iowa. So he actually traveled all the way to Iowa. And during the course of that stay in Iowa, and of course his other experiences in America, he came into contact with music of Native Americans, especially in Iowa. Also things like spirituals, Negro spirituals, and so on. And his charge then to young American composers, because Dvorak was invited to spend quite a bit of time in the U.S. with hopes that he can instill and inspire and teach the young and upcoming generation of American composers. And how do they go about creating what will become American music or American style of classical music towards the end of the 19th century, getting into the 20th century, of course. And Dvorak's answer or his suggestion to American composers was basically, here are so many great musical inspirations and source materials in the music of Native American tribes or African American spiritual tradition, and all of these different kinds of music, folk music, and dances that should become one of the inspirations and source materials for American composers. Just much in the way that Dvorak, of course, he established himself as a nationalist composer. By that, I mean drawing on the music of his native Bohemia, currently Czech Republic, of course, the various sorts of folk dances, sometimes actual folk songs, but writing melodies, original melodies that are done in the style of, or that something that evokes the spirit or the sound of his native land, or writing pieces based on either the legend or literature, let's say, of his country. And so, of course, he wanted the American composers to establish their own identity too. And those were some of his suggestions to go about doing that. So Amy Beach, who grew up in New England, and she became sort of a musical fixture, if you would, in Boston. Amy Beach. Beach is the married name, actually. But she started out, she was a piano prodigy and started composing when she was quite young. And when you look at her list of catalog or the catalog of pieces that she composed a lot of solo piano music, of course, because she was an outstanding pianist. Some great chamber music, for instance, her piano quintet is among the most outstanding piano quintets from the Romantic era, really. And a lot of songs, so voice solo with piano, sort of art songs, if you would, sort of in the style, similar in vein, genre-wise to something that Franz Schubert or Felix Mendelssohn did, let's say. And she wrote a few larger scale orchestral works. This is the only symphony she wrote, is the Gaelic Symphony. And interesting thing about Amy Beach also is that she married when she got married to there was a very well-to-do physician in Boston. And when they got married, her husband had basically one condition, and that was for Amy Beach to cut down on the number of her public performances as a pianist, because before this, she was very active on concert life everywhere, performing as a pianist, oftentimes performing her own works, but also performing the music works of other composers as well. But her husband wanted her to really cut back the number of the performances to basically one or two a year. Um, and 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 also, instead of taking the fees for these appearances as she had done, well, basically donating the fees, the proceeds to the charities of their choice. And then he made the deal more attractive by saying to her, well, in exchange, now you can really turn to your first love as a musician, which was to compose. So he would support her in that regard, as far as getting her works published and getting her works performed by other performers and so on. So that's what Amy Beach agreed to that. Later on, when her husband passed away, she resumed a very active concert activity as a pianist, and touring not only in the United States but also in Europe as well. So Amy Beach, upon hearing and learning, studying this New World Symphony by Dvorak, and she wanted to create basically her own response as somebody who lived in Boston for many years and was very familiar with and was very much in love with the music of Irish Americans or Irish people, folk songs, Irish songs, or dances, of course, the jigs and reels and so on. So she decided to craft, and it's in the same key even of E minor as the Dvorak's New World Symphony, a grandiose four-movement symphony, and called it Gaelic Symphony. And in it, she quotes various different Irish songs, traditional songs, Some of these songs were popular in Boston at the time among the Irish American community, and also some dances as well, infusing those melodies into many of her original materials throughout. And the second movement of, and I've done this symphony a few times in its entirety, a couple times recently, but I'm particularly very fond of the second movement of this, which is called Alla Siciliana. Siciliana is a very gentle, rollicking type of dance. Usually is on the slower side. So the opening and closing is in that style of Sicilian and features a lot of great solo writing. Starts out with the horn solo. You hear the oboe solo, and then you hear the English horn solo. You will hear also like this great English horn oboe duet in this section. In the middle of this, so it's in three parts basically. So it's like slow, fast, slow. The middle part is this very exciting reel in which the violin sections, both the first and second violins in particular, are basically kind of fiddling. They're playing all of these Irish inspired, folk dance inspired figure, and it's very fun to perform and I think listen to. And it kind of leads into our next piece on the program, which is the Piazzolla's Four Seasons of Buenos Aires. We've done a few pieces by Astor Piazzolla. Piazzolla was born in Buenos Aires, and when he was 4 years old, his family moved to New York City, where they spent about 10 years before moving back to Argentina. So even since when he was little, Piazzolla loved the tango music, and he became the master of bandoneon, which is this button accordion that is the essential instrument for tango music. So the quintet consisted of Piazzolla himself on bandoneon, and then you would have a violin and a bass, and then piano and guitar. So those instruments consisted of the quintet. Notice there's no percussion involved in this, but if you listen to a lot of the recordings, let's say, of Piazzolla playing tangos or his own compositions with his quintet, you would often hear what sounds like a drums or some kind of a percussion instrument. And a lot of times those effects were done by all these other musicians. For instance, there are all these specific string technique that's used for tango music that creates a very different sound than what you normally hear from these instruments. A lot of times they even have an effect called tambour, which means drums. So there's a way of plucking the strings, but they do it in such a unique way that it creates a completely different kind of sound and kind of effect. Sometimes like the bassists might tap on their instrument also to create the drumming effect. The pianist might tap on the instrument as well. And, all of these things that kind of adds the percussive effect without actually having a drummer in this ensemble. And Piazzolla, as a young musician, of course, he was great. He was a great bandoneon player, but he also wanted to study composition also. So he very much adored the music of his fellow countryman Alberto Ginastera, who's considered one of the leading 20th century composers, but also music of people like Bela Bartok, let's say, or Igor Stravinsky. So a lot of these 20th century composers who wrote a very rhythmically challenging and complex works, but in the case especially of Bartok and also Ginastera, oftentimes incorporating the folk element of their native countries into the fabric of these edgy sounds that were, becoming very popular at the time. So he had this interest in contemporary music that infused folk elements. And then, especially when he spent those like early years, like in New York, he came into contact with a lot of jazz and jazz musicians. And so he very much wanted to incorporate jazz elements into his own music as well. And then there was the traditional tango music that he grew up listening to and what made him want to become a musician really in the first place. So what he did was he kind of synthesized all these three elements. So traditional tango music, jazz, and 20th century contemporary classical music at the time. And he kind of combined those to create his own style. And we now call it Nuevo Tango, so new tango. New tango music basically was sort of what became his signature style and sound. He actually at one point in 1950 he won this competition that was sponsored by one of the orchestras in Buenos Aires, composition contest, and he won that. And as a prize, he had the opportunity to go to Paris and study with the legendary Nadia Boulanger there. Boulanger had taught many of the leading 20th century composers. She's probably considered one of the most influential composition teachers, especially it was for sure in the 20th century, if not of all time, really. She taught people like Aaron Copland, for instance. And um, Piazzolla took some of his original music, and he wasn't sure what kind of pieces that he should have Boulanger, look at. So he kind of took some of the first. He kind of presented her with some of his non-tango pieces, and you know, and she thought, okay, well these are good, but after a while she felt as though Piazzolla was kind of hiding something, maybe there was something else that is truly uh his true passion and true love as a composer. So she at one point asked, like, well, what else do you have? And he kind of reluctantly played his original tango, and Boulanger basically was like, well, no, that's it, that's your that's your style. That's the language. That's your musical language that you should polish as a composer. And so, after that, Piazzolla never looked back. The Four Seasons of Buenos Aires was initially Piazzolla wrote it so that you can find a recording of him performing this with his quintet. And it was many years later, like in the 90s, Russian violinist Gidon Kramer commissioned a Russian composer, Dasyanikov, to sort of make a special transcription or arrangement of the set of Four Seasons, and but redo it for violin solo with string orchestra. And I think initially, very first recording, the CD recording of this piece, did pair the Vivaldi with the Piazzolla set. And oftentimes you will actually hear sort of eight seasons in a way. So you hear both the Vivaldi set and the Piazzolla set. We're just doing the Piazzolla set on this concert. And what the Dasyanikov did, and it's kind of interesting, if you're familiar with the Vivaldi and if you listen to this version of Piazzolla's Four Seasons, you might recognize a few snippets of Vivaldi, sort of almost like fragments, almost like a memory, or as a joke, kind of making their like kind of sneaking their way into the Piazzolla, and that's something that Dasyanikov, the arranger, kind of did himself. That wasn't really in the Piazzolla's original. But it's a fun piece. It does call upon the players to use some of these special effects that are traditional tango technique on the instruments. So it's always a fun piece to do for us and for the audiences to listen to as well. And that brings us to the Tchaikovsky's Pathetique Symphony, his Sixth Symphony, and as I mentioned, it was the final piece he completed before he passed away. And there, as soon as very much as soon as the piece was, you know, written and then performed a few times, and of course after Tchaikovsky died, there were many speculations as to, did Tchaikovsky know he was going to die? Is this his sort of, um, some kind of a message? Is there, are there secret message, hidden message, or meaning in this piece. And, it's all sort of speculation. So I'm not going to really get into that in this case. What is unique, though, is the way he structured the symphony. And, when he wrote this symphony, it was still very unusual to have a very long four movement symphony that ends with a slow movement and dying away quietly. You know, Several years later, of course, we see this. For instance, in Mahler's Ninth Symphony is sort of a musical leave taking in a way, and Mahler ends that symphony really in a way he was saying farewell to the world. And but it is really drawn out. It's almost like a 25, 30-minute slow movement that has its moments of heightened passion, but it just slowly just really dies away. But that didn't come, until the 20th century. And so it was very unique to have the fourth and the finale. Instead of a grand finale, you would have this slow movement, um, very, very mournful, and it does pick up steam, but then it just slowly dies away and ends with the sound of the low instruments, so sound of the cellos and the basses, just quietly fading away into silence. It must have been a fairly shocking thing to listen to if you were at the premiere or one of the first performances. Um, the way the symphony ends also kind of calls back to the way the symphony starts. So the very beginning of the symphony and the first movement also starts with this very slow, sustained chord in the basses. And out of that emerges this very, very sorrowful melody in the bassoon. So again, the melody starts in the low register of the orchestra as well, and that gets passed on to the violas, comes to a rest, and then goes again. And that forms the integral part of the slow introduction. Of the piece, and the idea you hear at the very onset in the bassoon becomes you will keep on hearing the reference to that idea even in the main fast section of the first movement as well. The first movement is the longest movement by far out of the four, and it has so much drama in it. Here you will hear, and then some of these are very extreme. Tchaikovsky um, was the one who kind of uh, increased the dynamic range of the orchestra in a way. Um, used to be, simply used to be piano and forte. And then when Beethoven came, he sort of expanded it. So pianissimo, two pianos, fortissimo, two fortes. And then sometimes composers after him would use like three, so even softer than two pianos, three pianos, and then even louder than the two fortes would be three fortes. In this symphony, you will see moments where it's written definitely with three fortes and so on. But on the softer side, he will add some passages where it says four pianos. So it's almost not audible, well, basically a whisper. And so he wanted that wide range of expression, dynamic range from the players in the orchestra. Um, Second movement it sounds like a waltz, but instead of waltz, which is in three beats, so it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's in five. So one side is, and he divides it two and three. So it's always like you're dancing, but maybe, one side is shorter than the other kind of thing. So it's always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it's very graceful. Does kind of evoke the spirit of his famous, of course, he's well known for these great ballet works, the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty. It kind of, evokes back to those works, the dance works by Tchaikovsky. And then the third movement, um, third movement sounds like what should be the finale in a way. So it's a march, and that starts out very quiet, but it just, starts to build and build. Um, and it's just, you think it's getting to the conclusion, but he just can't stop it. So it just keeps on going almost to the point where it starts to sound like an empty celebration in a way. It just becomes starts to become almost uncomfortable because this triumphant conclusion is just keeps on going to the point where you start to doubt yourself. Is this a triumphant conclusion, or is there something, sinister behind it, or is this fake? Is this, are you pretending to be triumphant? But it, ends in this blaze of fanfare at the end. Typically, traditionally, a lot of people will clap there. Even in Europe, where they don't tend to clap, applaud between movements, but traditionally, like it almost has become a little joke, because it just sounds like the end of a piece. But then, of course, you have this very mournful fourth movement that is the actual finale to the symphony. The Tchaikovsky symphonies, there are six symphonies, six numbered symphonies that he wrote, that he completed. The last three are often performed, four, five, and six, and those are among my favorites too. Both to conduct and to listen to, as well. But there's always something about this Pathetique symphony uh, that is, that feels very like emotional, or it's just, you can't help but get swept away in all the wide range of drama and emotions that Tchaikovsky kind of, poured onto the page here. So that's why it's been a popular favorite with symphony audiences over the years, after he wrote it in 1893. And hope you enjoy our rendition of it at tonight's concert as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon on the live stream. Thank you.